I've always hated these things. Corporate galas, networking events, whatever you want to call them, it's all the same circus. Everyone pretending to care about quarterly earnings while angling for the next big favor. Too much small talk, too many fake smiles. But that night, I was there, standing under the chandeliers of a 5-star Miami hotel because Emma asked me to be. Correction, Emma insisted. It'll mean a lot to me if you come, Thomas, she said, giving me that look. The one that always made me cave. So I put on the tailored suit, polished my shoes, and followed her into a world I didn't belong in. At first, it was typical. Glass walls, polished marble floors that reflected every light fixture, making the place glow like a jewelry box. Waiters floated by with silver trays, offering drinks with names I couldn't pronounce. Emma fit right in. She was always good at this. Smiling just the right amount, laughing at the right jokes. The perfect corporate wife. I was halfway through a conversation about venture capital, pretending to listen while mentally calculating how soon I could escape when something caught my eye. Or maybe it was someone. Emma. She was standing across the room near the tall windows that overlooked the bay. But she wasn't alone. There was a man beside her. Tall, tan, expensive looking. His suit was sharper than mine, the cut of a man who didn't know what off the rack meant. But it wasn't his clothes that got my attention. It was his bracelet. Gold. Thick. Distinctive. I'd seen it before. A few weeks back I was cleaning out Emma's car. She had asked me to grab something from the passenger side, and while I was at it I decided to do a little vacuuming. That's when I found it, the bracelet wedged under the seat. At the time I'd asked her about it. She barely looked up from her laptop when she said it was probably a colleague's. Someone she gave a ride to after work. No big deal, she'd said, flashing a dismissive smile. Back then I believed her. Now, standing in that glittering room, I realized how badly I wanted that story to be true. But here was the bracelet again, right where it belonged, on his wrist. And his hand, the one adorned with that telltale gold, was resting on Emma's waist with the ease of practice. Familiar. Comfortable. Like he had every right to be there. Emma didn't pull away. She didn't even seem to notice. But then, as they laughed at some shared joke, I saw her fingers brush lightly over the back of his hand. A soft, absent-minded caress. The kind you don't give a stranger. The kind you give someone who's been close. Very close. It was such a small gesture. So subtle. Anyone else might have missed it. But not me. In that moment, the crowd, the music, the clinking of glasses, it all blurred into white noise. I couldn't hear a thing over the pounding in my ears. I wasn't angry yet. That would come later. What I felt was something colder. Sharper. Recognition. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't just business. I stood there, watching from across the room, replaying old conversations in my head. The nights Emma came home late, claiming meetings had run over. The sudden business trips to places that didn't quite match up with her company's usual haunts. The new perfume, expensive, unfamiliar, that she wore only on evenings when I wasn't invited along. The way her phone, once casually left on kitchen counters, had become a permanent fixture in her pocket, always screen down, always on silent. One by one, the red flags fluttered back into view, forming a pattern I hadn't wanted to see. Until now. I didn't approach them. Not yet. I just watched. The man leaned in closer, saying something that made Emma laugh. A real laugh, not the polite one she used with investors. And as she did, her hand slid from his to his arm, fingers curling around his bicep in a way that was far too familiar. And still, she maintained that veneer of professionalism. Smiling, nodding, saying all the right things. To anyone glancing over, it might have looked harmless. But I knew her tells. The little things. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was flustered. The slight tilt of her head when she wanted to seem engaged. And now, the way she kept glancing around like she was making sure no one was watching too closely. Except someone was. Me. I didn't make a scene. That's not who I am. Besides, confrontation is for people who were surprised. I wasn't surprised anymore. I was connecting dots. It's funny how your mind works in those moments. You'd think I'd be flooded with emotion, maybe even denial. But what I felt was clinical. Detached. Like I was reading the end of a book whose plot twist I'd seen coming since chapter 1. Emma was having an affair. And this was the man. The bracelet was my proof. I stayed through the rest of the event. I didn't cause a scene. I didn't pull Emma aside and demand answers. I let her play her part. The loyal wife, the charming professional. She mingled, she smiled, she sipped her wine. And every time her eyes met mine across the room, she gave me that same sweet smile she always had. For a brief, cruel moment, I wondered how many times she'd smiled at me like that while lying straight to my face. When the gala finally wound down and people started to trickle out, Emma made her way back to me. She slid her arm through mine, leaning in close. "Thanks for coming tonight," she said softly. "I know these things aren't your scene." I smiled. I even meant it. Because now the game had changed. "Anything for you," I replied. Because the truth was I had all the time in the world now. This was no longer about being the good husband at some investor event. This was about seeing how far the rabbit hole went. And Emma had just given me my first breadcrumb. The night after the gala, I barely slept. I lay there, staring at the ceiling while Emma slept beside me or pretended to. Her breathing was slow, steady, but I could feel the tension radiating off her. Funny how silence can be deafening when the truth is screaming in your head. I didn't ask her about the man with the bracelet. I didn't need to. That simple touch, the way her fingers had grazed his hand like muscle memory, was louder than any confession. Instead, I replayed the last few months in my mind, over and over, like a tape on loop. Every little moment that had seemed off but was so easy to brush aside back then. It started with the late nights at work. At first, they made sense. She was managing a new project, a big client. Deadlines, stress, long hours, I understood that. Or at least, I wanted to. But then the business trips became more frequent. Always last minute, always with vague details. Chicago, Atlanta, sometimes Savannah. Yet, oddly enough, Emma never seemed to bring back stories. No hotel mishaps, no funny client encounters, nothing. Just generic lines like, "It went well," or "The meetings were productive." Once or twice, a mutual friend would post something on social media, a night out, a brunch Emma was notably absent from even though she'd said she was with family. Small inconsistencies. Easy to ignore. Easy to excuse. But now they piled up, forming a pattern I couldn't unsee. There was the perfume, too. A new one, bold, floral, not at all her usual scent. She claimed it was a gift from a client. Said she didn't even like it much. Yet, for someone who didn't like it, she wore it religiously on nights I wasn't invited to her work functions. And then there was her phone. Once it had lived casually on the kitchen counter or in her bag. Notifications would light up the screen, harmless messages from friends or family. But somewhere along the way it became a fixture in her pocket. Always face down, always on silent. At first, I joked about her being overly cautious. "What, are you working for the CIA now?" She'd laugh, ruffle my hair, and tell me I was being silly. Silly, right? One night, about a month ago, I stumbled across a receipt in her coat pocket. A high-end restaurant in Savannah. A dinner for two. The date matched a weekend she was supposedly visiting her sister. When I brought it up, she didn't even blink. "Oh, that? We grabbed a client dinner after a presentation." I must have forgotten about it. Forgotten. Just like that. And because I wanted to believe her, I let it go. But in the quiet of that night, lying next to her in the dark, it all came rushing back. Every dismissal. Every deflection. Every time she made me feel paranoid for even asking. And now, with the image of her and Mr. Gold bracelet burned into my mind, the puzzle snapped into place. The signs had been there all along. I was just too blind to see them. Or maybe too scared. The next morning, Emma behaved as if nothing had happened. She brewed coffee, asked if I wanted toast, made small talk about the weather. Perfectly composed. If she noticed my silence, she didn't comment on it. It was infuriating how easy it was for her to slide back into routine while my mind was a storm. I spent that day going through old messages, bank statements, anything I could get my hands on without being obvious. The more I looked, the clearer the pattern became. Hotel reservations under her name for work weekends that didn't match up with her company's official travel schedules. Restaurant bills from places we'd never been to together. Uber receipts that started and ended nowhere near her office. And then the emails. She wasn't careless enough to leave anything blatant. But there were breadcrumbs. Meeting confirmations that seemed innocuous on the surface, but when cross-referenced with those family visits or late-night work emergencies, the coincidences became harder to ignore. I started seeing through the gaps in her stories. She wasn't clumsy. She was careful. Too careful. That's what made it obvious. People who have nothing to hide aren't that meticulous about hiding it. The more I dug, the less I recognized the woman I married. Emma had always been strong, ambitious, focused, but honest. Or so I thought. Now, every memory felt like it had been rewritten in real time. Every smile, every "I love you," came with a shadow of doubt. What was real? What had been real? I kept coming back to that moment at the gala. That single touch. The way her fingers lingered, so casual, so familiar. Like they had done it 1,000 times before. That wasn't a mistake. That was muscle memory. By the end of the day, The weight of it all was crushing. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. It was proof. Maybe not the kind that would hold up in court, but enough for me to know. Enough for me to stop lying to myself. That night, Emma had another late meeting. She left the house dressed in a way that didn't scream business casual. Tight black dress, heels, the same perfume that had become her new signature scent. "Don't wait up," she said, kissing my cheek lightly. I didn't flinch. I didn't even react. But as the door closed behind her, something in me settled. This was no longer a suspicion. It was a certainty, and certainties come with consequences. I spent the rest of the evening drafting a plan. Not an impulsive, emotional outburst. Something smarter, quieter. I wasn't going to let her spin this when the time came. "No, it's not what it looks like. No, you're overreacting." The next time we had this conversation, I'd have more than intuition on my side. I needed tangible proof. Photographs, statements, a timeline. And for that, I needed help. I wasn't going to confront her half-cocked, because Emma had been playing this game in the shadows. And now it was my turn. It happened on a Thursday. I remember because Emma had told me she was flying to Atlanta for a leadership summit. She packed her navy blue suitcase, the one she only used for these so-called conferences, and left in a blur of efficiency. Peck on the cheek. A perfunctory, "Love you." The same routine. Almost mechanical now. But that afternoon, my schedule changed. A meeting got canceled. A client call rescheduled. Just like that, I had time. The kind of time that leaves you alone with your thoughts. Dangerous, swirling thoughts. So I made a choice. Instead of heading straight home, I took a detour. Circled back through downtown, past the office buildings and coffee shops, and found myself near the entrance to our apartment complex. That's when I saw them. Emma wasn't in Atlanta. She was right here, walking down the sidewalk hand in hand with him. The man from the gala, Mr. Gold Bracelet. They weren't hiding. They weren't being careful. No trench coats and sunglasses. Just two people strolling through the late afternoon sun, wrapped up in each other. Her hand fit into his like it had been there 1,000 times. Their bodies leaned toward each other with a kind of int*macy that no business colleague shares. I didn't move. I didn't call out her name. I just watched. They paused by a cafe, laughing at something he said. Emma's face. God, it was radiant. Not the tight, polite smile she gave me in the mornings. This was different, relaxed, alive. It struck me then in a way that no amount of receipts or muted phones ever could. This wasn't an affair of convenience. This was a choice, a life she was living parallel to mine. They turned the corner, disappearing out of sight, but I didn't follow. I didn't need to. That single image was already burned into my brain, sharp and clear. A *T of betrayal. When I finally went home, the apartment felt different. Not because anything had changed. Her scarf was still tossed over the chair. Her coffee mug sat by the sink. But the air itself felt heavier, thicker, like the walls knew and were too polite to tell me sooner. I didn't confront her when she returned that evening. She waltzed in, suitcase in hand, spinning another story about flight delays and exhausting panel discussions. I let her talk, let her lie, because now it wasn't about catching her in the act. It was about building the case. The next day, I started gathering. Quietly, methodically. Bank statements were my first target. Digital records that painted a picture she never meant me to see. Hotel bookings under her name, not charged to the company card. Dinners for two at places we'd never been together. Spa visits during times she claimed to be in meetings. She wasn't sloppy. But no one's perfect. There were little things, inconsistencies that stuck out when viewed side by side. Trips that didn't match with her firm's press releases. Expenses billed to personal cards on business trips. Payments to a boutique florist, recurring every 2 weeks. Funny, since I hadn't seen fresh flowers in our home for months. Piece by piece, the facade cracked. And then the message. It was hidden in her email drafts. She hadn't sent it yet. Maybe she was still mulling it over. Or maybe she thought she'd hidden it well enough. But curiosity, or maybe desperation, led me to it. Subject, this weekend. The body of the email was short, but each word hit like a hammer. I can't stop thinking about last time. You make me feel alive in a way I forgot was possible. Let's not wait another 2 weeks. Say yes. No names. No direct identifiers. But I didn't need a name. I knew exactly who she meant. That was the tipping point. The moment when suspicion solidified into certainty. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't insecure. Emma was cheating. Not a fling. Not a mistake. An affair. Ongoing. Repeated. Intentional. There was no room left for plausible deniability. The woman I had shared a life with was living a double one. That night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. I thought about the promises we made, vows exchanged in front of family and friends. The plans we built, vacations never taken, children never born, dreams deferred for a future that now felt like fiction. I thought about the times I had defended her. To friends who raised eyebrows at her absences. To family who gently asked why we didn't come around as often. I had believed her. Defended her. Loved her. And now all of that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. The next morning I took the day off work. Not to wallow. To prepare. I spent hours combing through everything. Pulling copies of receipts, emails, **TS of messages. Every breadcrumb she left I gathered. I organized them into folders, digital and physical. A timeline of betrayal. I contacted a lawyer. Someone discreet, out of our usual circles. Explained the situation in plain terms. I wasn't emotional. I wasn't ranting. I was clinical. Focused. Are you looking to confront her immediately? The lawyer asked. No, I said. Not yet. This needs to be done right. Because this wasn't about vengeance. It was about clarity. About making sure there was no way she could spin this into a misunderstanding. I wasn't going to give her the chance to play the victim. I wasn't going to be painted as the paranoid husband. The irony is I had once trusted Emma with every part of my life. Finances. Emotions. Dreams. And now the same level of meticulous trust was going into protecting myself from her. By the time Emma returned from her late meetings, everything was in place. She didn't notice the subtle changes. The quiet way I started pulling my name from joint accounts. The subtle redirection of mail. She didn't notice how I was no longer asking questions. How I no longer cared to press. Because the answer was already clear. I had all the proof I needed. And soon she would too. By the time the weekend rolled around, I was no longer driven by anger. The shock had passed. The betrayal had settled into something colder. Focused. People always say cheating hits you like a freight train, messy, devastating. And at first it does. But eventually the chaos gives way to clarity. And clarity is dangerous. It's quiet. Methodical. That's where I was now. Emma still had no idea I knew. She was good at pretending. But so was I. That Saturday morning, over coffee, she casually mentioned she'd be going into the office for a few hours. An urgent project. Weekend crunch time. She made it sound exhausting, even rolled her eyes for effect. The performance was flawless. I smiled, wished her good luck, and told her not to work too hard. As she kissed my cheek and grabbed her bag, she had no clue I was watching her leave with the full knowledge of exactly where she was headed. And more importantly, who she was meeting. I didn't follow her. Not this time. I didn't need to. That part of the story was already written. Instead, I stayed home and finished preparing my exit. I wasn't going to confront her in a fit of rage. No shouting matches, no accusations flung across the living room. Emma would expect that. She would know how to navigate it. Twist it. She'd find a way to shift the narrative, maybe play the victim, maybe blame me for being emotionally distant. No. This had to be clean. Surgical. While she was out, I organized everything I had gathered into a single, damning portfolio. Receipts, hotel bookings, messages, the timeline all lined up like dominoes. I printed copies, labeled them, even made backups. Redundancy was key. I also had my consultation with the lawyer finalized. We discussed asset protection, the nuances of no-fault divorce, and more importantly, how to handle the public perception. Emma's reputation mattered to her more than anything. She curated her image like a work of art. She wouldn't want this to be messy. But the evidence was too thorough, too undeniable. The beauty of a calculated response is that it leaves no room for interpretation. Emma wouldn't be able to cry her way out of it. Not with this. After lunch, I started shifting our joint finances. Quietly, of course. Rerouting direct deposits to personal accounts she no longer had access to. Freezing unnecessary credit cards. Making a list of assets that were mine alone. I made sure to leave a clear, traceable paper trail. This wasn't revenge. This was self-defense. I even visited the storage unit we rarely used, pulling out the documents she probably forgot existed. Our prenup. Signed, witnessed, airtight. Back when we first got married, it was just a formality. A safety net neither of us expected to need. Now it was my shield. By the time Emma returned that evening, glowing from another afternoon of lies, my plan was fully operational. She asked if I wanted to order in. Sushi, maybe. A lazy night in. I said yes. Why wouldn't I? There was no rush now. I was playing a long game. Over dinner, I listened as she recounted her day at the office. She talked about meetings, deliverables, project timelines. She even complained about a coworker being inefficient. The performance was Oscar-worthy. I nodded in all the right places. The thing is, once you know someone's lying to you, every word they say becomes white noise. You stop hearing the details. You start watching the tells. The way she avoided holding eye contact for too long. The subtle way she kept her phone screen tilted away. The faint trace of cologne that wasn't mine lingering on her clothes. I didn't flinch, because none of this was surprising anymore. The next morning, while Emma slept in, I drafted a simple email. No emotion. No accusations. Just facts. I wrote it to her using her work email, the one she checked obsessively. Subject: for your review. Attached was a copy of everything. The receipts, the emails, the photos. A perfectly curated timeline of her affair. A digital mirror reflecting the life she thought she had hidden. I scheduled it to send at precisely 8 a.m. on a weekday. Strategic. Because nothing rattles someone more than seeing their entire deception laid out before their first coffee. I didn't want her to see it during a quiet Sunday. I wanted her to feel that gut punch while she sat at her desk, surrounded by coworkers, in her element, the place where she thought she was untouchable. In parallel, I drafted the official paperwork with my lawyer. Divorce filings. Prepped, signed, dated, ready to be served. But timing was everything. This wasn't about crushing her. It was about control. Emma had spent months, maybe longer, controlling the narrative, leading a double life, gaslighting me with casual smiles and rehearsed stories. Now it was my turn. Over the following days, I withdrew from confrontation. I was polite, distant but civil, not cold enough to raise alarms, but detached enough to reclaim my space. I started going to the gym again, took long walks in the evening, reconnected with friends she'd subtly distanced me from over the years. People noticed, but I kept the reasons to myself. No dramatic announcements, just quiet recalibration. Emma, for her part, seemed relieved. Maybe she thought the worst had passed, that her deflections had worked. She smiled more. She even suggested we plan a weekend getaway. The irony was suffocating. I told her we'd talk about it soon. When the morning of the email finally arrived, I woke up before Emma, made coffee, sat at the kitchen counter like it was any other day. At exactly 8 a.m., I heard her phone buzz, a soft chime, silence, then the subtle shift in her breathing. I didn't look up. I didn't need to. In that moment, I knew she was reading every line, seeing every receipt, every timestamp, every photograph, watching the web she'd spun collapse in real time. Still, I waited, let the weight of the evidence settle. Minutes passed, maybe 5, maybe 10. Time felt elastic. Finally, I heard her footsteps. She appeared in the doorway, pale, her lips slightly parted. "Thomas," she began, but there was no script for this moment, no well-rehearsed story to lean on. I closed my laptop gently. "There's nothing you can say right now that I haven't already read," I said quietly. She stood there, frozen. I gestured to the chair opposite me. "Sit. Read it again. Every word. Don't insult us both by pretending this is a misunderstanding." She didn't sit, didn't speak, just stood there, clutching her phone like a lifeline. It wasn't rage I felt. It wasn't even betrayal. It was relief. The waiting was over. Emma now lived in the same reality as me. And that was step one. The rest would follow. It was a quiet Wednesday evening when I finally put everything on the table. Literally. No shouting. No ultimatums. No theatrics. Just an envelope. Plain, unassuming, sitting on the dining table like a landmine only one of us could see. Inside was the truth. Neatly compiled, chronologically ordered. The affair in black and white. Receipts, screensh *TS, hotel bookings, emails, the paper trail of Emma's double life laid out with clinical precision. This wasn't for shock value. This was documentation. Evidence. The culmination of every sleepless night, every lie she thought had slipped through the cracks. It was all here now. In a manila envelope between us. Emma came home later than usual. She walked in like nothing was wrong. Her keys dropped into the bowl by the door. Her shoes kicked off carelessly. She was humming to herself. That little tune she always did when she thought no one was paying attention. A detail that once made me smile. Now it just echoed. She noticed the envelope right away. The shift in her expression was subtle, a fraction of a second where her brows lifted, her lips parted. A flicker of recognition. She knew. She didn't ask what it was. Didn't ask if it was for her. She knew. I sat at the head of the table, hands folded, watching her. Emma, I said, my voice even, please sit. For a moment, I thought she might run. Bolt for the door, claim exhaustion, postpone the inevitable. But she didn't. She sat. Her fingers hovered over the envelope, hesitating. Like it might burn her. Open it, I said quietly. She did. No dramatic gasp. No outburst of denial. Just a slow, deliberate perusal. Page by page. Her eyes moved, scanning each document, each photo, each timestamp. The silence between us was suffocating. I had prepared for a lot of things, deflection, anger, tears. But what I wasn't prepared for was her composure. She read through the entire file with the same focus she gave her quarterly reports. Clinical. Detached. When she finished, she set the papers down, stacked them neatly. I see you've done your research, she said. Her tone was neutral. No apology. No excuses. Just a simple acknowledgement. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a confession for her. It was a formality. I leaned back in my chair, studying her. How long were you going to keep lying? I asked. She exhaled a slow, measured breath. As long as it was easier than the alternative. That answer stung in a way no shouted accusation ever could. I see, I said. We sat there in silence. Two people who had once shared everything, now reduced to strangers discussing the fallout of deceit. I didn't want to hurt you, Thomas, she said eventually. I almost laughed. Funny, I replied. Because you've done nothing but. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. And that, more than anything, told me this wasn't an impulsive mistake for her. This had been a choice. A series of choices. You weren't even going to tell me, were you? I asked. Emma looked down, tracing the edge of the table with her finger. I told myself I would. Eventually. But it never felt like the right time. I shook my head. The right time. Like it was an item on her to-do list. Well, I said I've made it the right time. I reached into the same envelope and pulled out the divorce papers. Slid them across the table toward her. Her fingers didn't shake as she picked them up. She read through the first page, lips pressed into a thin line. You're prepared, she said. I had to be, I replied. You've been prepared for months. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine. There was something in her gaze, not regret, not guilt. Acceptance. This is what you want? She asked. I wanted to scoff. What I wanted was irrelevant. This was the reality she had created. I was simply responding to it. What I want is a life without lies, I said. A life where I don't have to second-guess everything you say. She nodded almost to herself. I'll sign them, she said. I won't fight you on this. For a brief, surreal moment, I felt a pang of something. Not love. Not sadness. Maybe just the finality of it. The end of an era. A marriage reduced to signatures and legal forms. You don't want to explain yourself? I asked, not because I needed her reasons, but because I wanted to hear how she'd spin it. Emma's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. What would be the point, she said. You already know the truth. Anything I say now would just be justification. And honestly, I'm tired of lying. Even to myself. There it was. The truth. Simple. Brutal. I loved you, Thomas, she added, softer now. I probably still do. But somewhere along the way I stopped being the person who deserved you. It wasn't an apology. Not really. But it was as close as she could get. And strangely, I appreciated the honesty. We didn't fight that night. There were no raised voices, no tears. Just a quiet understanding that what we had was over. She signed the papers. Date, signature, initials on every page. It was clinical. Efficient. Like closing out a contract. When it was done, she gathered her things quietly. There was no drama. No packing of boxes in a fury. She didn't slam doors or break down in sobs. She simply moved with the precision of someone who had been waiting for this moment. "Where will you go?" I asked. She shrugged. "I've had a place lined up. Just in case." Of course she did. The woman who planned everything down to the minute wouldn't stumble into a separation unprepared. "Good luck, Emma," I said. And I meant it. Not because I wished her well, but because I no longer had the energy to wish her anything at all. As she stood in the doorway, suitcase in hand, she looked back once. "I'm sorry it ended like this," she said. "It ended the moment you decided I didn't need to know the truth," I replied. And then she was gone. No fanfare. No grand exit. Just the quiet click of the door closing. I sat there for a long time after she left. The apartment felt different. Lighter, somehow. Emptier, yes, but also clearer. Like I could finally breathe without the weight of pretense suffocating me. There's a strange kind of peace that comes with the truth even when it hurts. I didn't feel victorious. There was no satisfaction in this ending. But there was clarity. And clarity was enough. For now, the weeks after Emma left were eerily quiet. No fights, no closure talks, just absence. I methodically disentangled our lives, closed joint accounts, redirected mail, packed her forgotten belongings. Each task felt less like grief, more like cleaning up after a storm. Emma didn't reach out. No calls. No apologies. She vanished with the same quiet efficiency she'd used to deceive. Strangely, I wasn't angry anymore. Just tired. When her key finally slid through the mail slot in a plain envelope, I knew the last thread had been cut. We didn't need words. The silence said it all. Freedom came quietly. I found peace in small routines, morning runs, coffee in shops where no one knew my name. For once, life felt honest. Simple. That's when I met Haley. She wasn't flashy, wasn't playing games. Just genuine, with a laugh that didn't hide anything. We started slow. No expectations, no shadows. With her, I didn't feel like I was walking on broken glass. I wasn't trying.